Happy Monday, everyone. This is Martha with Nature Niche, and this week I'm going to talk to you about winter bud basics. Winter buds on shrubs and trees, it's a really helpful way to identify them in the winter months. And I just had the pleasure of doing a Winter Woody Plant ID webinar for the Washtenaw County Conservation District. So I'll drop that link in this video's description. That was about an hour long, so if you really want to get into the details and nitty-gritty of Winter Woody Plant ID, you can watch that. But I thought for this week I'd just talk about buds in particular. So buds are like tiny cocoons. They protect the dormant, undeveloped young shoots of the shrubs and trees for the following year. And many are covered by hard plate-like structures called bud scales. So you can see that, you can see those scales here on this particular northern red oak buds. And besides having bud scales, you should know that buds, there are a couple of kinds. There are terminal buds that occur at the very end of the twig, and in some species those buds don't really form, and so you end up with a lateral bud, which are the buds that come off along the stem. They take over and you end up with this bud kind of off center, and that's a false terminal bud. And then lateral buds, and then there are also buds that become floral shoots, so floral buds, and vegetative buds, which become the foliage of the shrubs and trees the next year. And there are many really helpful bud characteristics that you can consider to help you know what you're looking at over the winter months. So things like bud arrangement, where they occur and how they're arranged on the twig. One of the best features that you can look at is whether those buds are oppositely arranged or alternately arranged. So as an example, I have a red maple twig in my hand, and you can see right here that the buds, here's that terminal bud I was talking about, but the buds come off opposite each other at a node, so where the buds join the twig, and you can see that that leads to opposite branching of the plant. In contrast, I'll show you witch hazel, Hamamelis virginiana, and on this one the buds come off at alternate points or nodes along the twig. So this shrub is alternately arranged. And especially in Michigan and probably elsewhere, there are many fewer species that are oppositely arranged, and even fewer that are whorled. And whorled just means instead of two, you have 3 or more buds or branches coming off at the same point. So that's a great characteristic to pay attention to. Also, some species have interesting bud arrangements, like oaks, for example. You tend to get a lot of buds clustered at the tips of the twigs, and so that's a very distinctive characteristic to look for, at least get you down to the oak genus. And then so that's also positioning on the twig. Some species are oppressed, meaning that they are pushed right up against the twig. So as an example, I have a willow branch, and you can see how those buds are pushed way right up next to the twig. And other species, the buds are much more divergent, meaning they stick off from the twig. And then in some species, the buds are even like set up on a little stalk. So you can see that here on this witch hazel, that some of these buds are set up on a nice little peg-like structure there. So those are good things to look for. The relative size of the buds, some species like American Beech have like very long, almost inch long buds. And you know, some species like willows have these little, you know, couple of millimeter long buds. And also floral buds tend to be larger than buds that are vegetative, will become leaves and shoots in the future. And shape is also very helpful. So just as some examples, the oaks tend to, especially things in the red or black oak group, tend to be sharp pointed, kind of more like an arrowhead, whereas red maple buds are a little more rounded. And some buds I like to use a lot of when I was teaching Woody Plants Labs at University of Michigan, and as I do subsequent classes, I carry on the tradition of food analogies. And so the witch hazel shrub has a bud that's flat on one side, curved on the other, kind of light tan. We call this the taco shell, the corn taco shell shaped bud. So overall shape, I feel like I had another example in my hand here. The invasive autumn olive, many of its buds, they kind of have two parts to them, and I think they look like little crab claws. So bud shape can be very important to look for, and color, tan and you know, slightly scurfy on the, or hairy, rough hairy on the witch hazel, and red maple buds tend to have that red or cast to them. So color can be, again, very, very helpful. You can see that red color nicely there. And then hairy or not. Some species have, you know, pretty hairy buds, and many are not. So those are all things to keep in mind as you're doing your winter woody plant ID. And then looking at the bud scales that I mentioned, kind of how many there are, how they're arranged, and kind of what kind of scales they are. Some species have naked buds, so no scales at all, and it's just like the shriveled leaf primordia kind of hanging out there waiting for next year. So that's the case with the witch hazel. You can kind of picture that those are shriveled little leaves there, no bud scales to look at. In comparison to the willow, which has a kind of a little cat claw bud with a single scale protecting that meristem tissue. And then species like the maples have their bud scales kind of paired, and they switch direction 90 degrees with each tier of scale. And species like red oak have many bud scales. All right, so those are some winter bud basics. I hope that helps. And again, if you want more detail about winter woody plant ID, check out the webinar I just taught. Thanks and have a good week.